All right, we're live. No one's watching yet, but we're live, and that's all that matters. So, we were talking about conferences, and now we're public, so we can't talk intimate the way that we were. But do you have anything else coming up after you had told me that you were taking a break after this?
Well, I do. This is going to be my last virtual user group meeting that I do for a while.
Okay.
So you did ask me. The last one I did was supposed to be the last one, and you asked me like a day later, and I said yes. But I do have some virtual stuff next week with Codapalooza. That's a conference that's usually in Louisville, Kentucky.
Yep.
It was virtual last year, and it's virtual this year. And I have 2 talks next week. So one that I'm still kind of creating. So
I'm in the same boat. So I'll be at Codapalooza as well. I have a workshop and a talk, and I haven't done a 8-hour workshop in a very long time. And it's new material. It's been a while since I've done it, and I'm just anxious. I'm anxious to do it, and it's virtual to top it off. So
I have a 2-day virtual workshop at the end of September for the VS Live crew.
Oh, cool!
So yeah.
That one in person?
No, that one's virtual. So yeah. So that one's 2 days. And if I don't know who's on, but if anyone is interested, reach out to me. It's covering some really advanced, like from the beginning to advanced topics for ASP.NET Web API. So
good times.
Yeah, so we're going to start learning just the basics and all the code, and then some architecture, how to do kind of an end tier, and then do domain-driven development, Web API, and then go to hypermedia and try to get as close to REST as we can get.
There you go.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah,
I wish I was going. I would like to see that.
Well, I'll probably take a lot of that content and kind of spread it out. But then I have a 4-hour workshop in person at KCDC, which I think you're going to be at.
I'll be there, but I'll be doing a workshop as well. So.
Oh, okay. Well, I only have a 4 hour, so that'll kind of help me build up to a 2-day, and it's only a 4 hour on the same. It's a Web API workshop, so I'll be doing the basic stuff.
Good times. We have some folks watching us now. Shout out to Jonathan. Jonathan's a local, but he's not at home. He's at the water park right now.
Nice.
Watching us. So are you, Jonathan? I hope you're like in an inner tube going around a lazy river with your phone in front of you, because that would be the best way to learn.
I just hope he has a beer in his hand. So
yeah,
or some kind of
watching it for long.
Yeah.
We have Chad Green. So we were just talking about Codapalooza. So yep. Chad's probably really busy getting that all set up. I said it last year, in terms of virtual events, Codapalooza was probably one of the best virtual events I participated in. Just because Chad is amazing and does a great job anyway, but the system he uses, Hampton, is fantastic.
It is
compared to everything else out there.
Yep.
So he's using the same system. So if you're interested, Codapalooza is a great virtual event to go to. It's probably the closest to the conference experience without being at a conference. I think it's a good way of putting it.
Chad does a great job. So Chad does an excellent job, and so I'm excited to do 2 talks next week. Yeah.
Yes, sir. So what are you 2 talks at Codapalooza?
Well, I know the one that I'm still creating is over how to do genetic algorithms.
Yeah.
It's kind of like an AI talk, but slightly different from traditional like machine learning, neural networks. This is going over, and I did genetic algorithms in college as my senior project. So it's that, and can't remember the other one. I think the other one maybe it's probably my web API talk. So
Chad should tell us. He should know all those by heart.
he should, but
Yeah.
he's too busy. But there are two really good talks. I'm excited. The genetic algorithm one, since I am creating it right now, will be the first time that I do that one.
He says you're doing any framework debugging.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's my teaching entity framework and .NET developers how to use the SQL Server tools to debug your queries. So I love that talk because, I mean, I don't know. One thing I like about you is you always kind of dig in and suit your supercharge topic and do that. And so this is kind of in the same vein of that talk is, you know what? Have you ever had a query that you've run in Entity Framework and it runs, but it doesn't run real fast?
Yeah.
And for most developers, they're like, "Oh yeah, it runs. It's good to go." But you know what? You should jump over to SQL if SQL Server is what you're using, and take a look at the tools the profiling tools that they have to take a look at everything and see if you're missing an index or see if it's bogging down on like one area of your query that you can kind of tweak and figure out. And so the talk is all around that. It's kind of trying to make your DBA happy by kind of learning a little bit about their world. And if you don't have a DBA, then you have to be a DBA and you have to jump over to that side and do the work over there, because it's a moral imperative that we build our software as best we can.
Absolutely. Good.
Okay, now I'll get off my soapbox.
No, I agree. Stay on that soapbox. More people need to hear that message. I do very little EF. Like I've done this circle where I loved EF and I hated EF. Now I'm coming back around on it again. It's ebbs and flows.
Yeah, it's had a interesting life, but since EF Core 2, it's actually been really good. So I mean, for me, I still do some Dapper and
do
stuff,
a lot of Dapper,
but it really they're about neck and neck right now. And for all the features, hence what I'm going to be talking about tonight, I give EF Core a little kind of advantage, because there's stuff that you can do in EF Core that Dapper just doesn't have.
Yeah.
And now that EF Core, the performance of it is top notch, then I mean there's really no, unless you just want super fast, and you could do Dapper, just basic Dapper. But if you want anything that gives your application some extra stuff, I mean, there's no reason not to do EF Core. And I don't say that because it's a Microsoft product. I say it because there isn't a whole lot out there. I mean, besides EF Core and Dapper, or just doing basic data sets. So
I was reading something, I don't remember where it was, but they were talking about that the performance of EF Core had gotten so good that the Dapper Core team is going back and looking at some of their performance metrics and see where they can improve, because EF if we were having this conversation a year and a half ago, you would say, yes, there's an obvious line in performance between EF and Dapper, or just writing it yourself. And now it's that line is so blurred that you can't really tell the difference between the two. So you can't make that argument.
Yeah, and Dapper gets an advantage because data sets are, I mean, if you dig down into Entity Framework Core, really it's data sets underneath, and they've improved the performance of those, and Dapper uses data sets also. So as far as I know, Dapper uses data sets, don't they, or do they have their own native?
Dapper contrib stuff that uses data sets. I think core Dapper is all directly
it's
off
all native. It's all their own special. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
But don't quote me on that because I haven't been in their code in a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we got some chat. So Surly Dev is asking, what's the extra? So you're probably going to show this tonight, but what's the extra stuff that EF Core offers?
Oh, there's tons of extra stuff. I mean, that's why I've been doing what's new in EF Core since really 2.0, because there's tons of stuff that, and I'm only going to be looking at 5 tonight, but there's stuff from 2, there's stuff from 2.1, there's stuff from 3 and 3.1. I mean, there's tons of stuff, and we'll talk about some stuff that we did that I talked about in previous iterations, but yeah, there's lots of extra stuff that most people don't think about or don't even know about, and so that's why I like doing these talks.
You have a fan in the audience.
Joe.
We'll just let anyone in.
But yeah, if you've let Joe in, you've let anybody in. No one's barred from this party. So
Joe, good to see you, sir. Well, Woody, we're not going to waste any more time. We've been talking EFs. We should just let you get into your talk, and then you can just tell us everything that we want to know.
Awesome.
So I'll let you go and share your screen again. But everyone out there, welcome. This is technically the Hampton Roads.net users group, but I'm Kevin Griffin. My friend to my left, your right, is Drew Carpenter, helps with the group. And then our special guest tonight is right under my face, Chris Woodruff, or Woody to all of his friends. Woody, it's so good to see you in person again.
Yeah, you too, Kevin. I can't wait to actually see you in the flesh. So
absolutely. So hopefully KCDC pending national disaster. I don't know.
Yeah, I think Joe's going to be there too. So we'll even see Joe there. So
well, dang, I should have booked out.
Yeah. So if anyone has questions, please put them wherever Kevin can get to them, and he'll interrupt me. Please interrupt me rudely if I don't have a break in my talking. I don't care if you just tell me to shut up and you have something that you want to talk to me about. So I just shared my screen.
All right, I'll add it.
Okay.
So, all right, Woody, the floor is yours.
Okay, awesome. Well, hey, I really appreciate this. This will be technically, this is going to be my last virtual user group talk that I'm going to do for this year. So we don't know what next year, we don't know what the future holds for any of us, so, or for the world. So hopefully it becomes better, and 2022 brings lots of good stuff, or the rest of 2021 brings some good stuff. But I'm going to bring some good stuff in terms of Entity Framework Core 5. So I love data. I love getting data into my applications. I love using data. And one of the things that I have loved and hated over the past decade has been Entity Framework. It, as Kevin and I were saying, it has had a kind of a love-hate relationship. But I love the team. I love the people that have worked on Entity Framework Core over the last 10, 11, 12 years. And so I give them mad props. And so I think we'll talk about that at the end, where you can learn more about Entity Framework Core from the Microsoft side. So again, my name's Chris Woodruff. Let me flip over so I can do that. So so all that animation. My name is Chris Woodruff. I work at Rocket Companies. So I put Rocket Companies because I'm kind of in a transition right now. So today I work at Rocket Mortgage, but as of this Monday, I will work at Rocket Homes. So at Rocket Mortgage, I have been leading the developer relations team for the past more than a year. And I've been at Rocket Mortgage for almost 2 years. And there was an opportunity for me to get back into technology, back into doing, kind of getting my hands dirty and doing maybe some real technical work. So I'm going over to Rocket Homes to implement a enterprise service bus for them. So it'll be kind of fun. So that's why I put Rocket Companies, because I'm kind of in kind of a flux right now. But you can email me at personal email is cwoodruff@live.com. My work email, and I forgot to change it. I have a new work email right now. It's chriswoodruff@rocketmortgage.com, but the Quicken Loans will still work. And on Twitter, you can find me at cwoodruff. So it's kind of the different ways that you can find me. So yeah, that didn't really come across in the best way. But hey, let's take a look at some things that I have talked about in the past. I've been doing talks around what's new in Entity Framework Core for maybe 3 or 4 years. And so some of the past stuff that you should keep an eye out on, I'm not going to talk about them now, because I've already talked about them in the past, and we're going to talk about 5 today. And these are things from 2 and 3. So there's like link, there's I think in 2, the like function was brought out, which corresponds to the SQL-like part of your select statement. Global query filters, awesome stuff. String interpolation and raw SQL methods, love that. So look at that up. Probably my favorite thing that has ever come out in EF Core or has been DB context pooling, because I do a lot of APIs and web API projects, and DB context pooling should be used all the time when you're doing web APIs. So imagine instead of every time you get a DB context out of your dependency injection container, and if you don't use pooling, DI has to, and .NET has to hydrate that dependency or DB context every single time. So it has to create a new one, give it to you, get it back, put it in the garbage collection or dispose of it, and let the GC take care of it, which causes performance. So imagine you have a pool of DB context sitting inside DI, and you just get one, and it's as easy as just calling it. You get it, and when it comes back, state stripped from it, and it's put back in the pool. And so the only performance hit is at the beginning of the application, which for a web application, and especially with a web API, your startup, I don't care if it's another second to create all these DB contexts. If I can save tons of stuff down the road, tons of time down the road, not having to create those coming out of DI. So there's that. So do definitely take a look at DB context pooling. They added group by, which was needed for years. Query tags. So query tags are cool because you can actually now send messages over to the SQL server, and this is more for SQL Server. So you can send messages that get logged over in SQL Server with your queries. So if a DBA finds a query that they don't like or they can improve, you can put these messages into the log that tell the DBA, hey, maybe take a look at where this query came from. This query came from this project and this class and this method. So I use query tags to give my DBAs as much information about those queries so they can come back to me and say, hey, you have a really crappy query and it's in this method. And I can go, oh, well, let me fix it. And things get fixed a lot quicker. We can now, if you're a DB first user of EF Core like I am, I hate code first, I can reverse engineer all of my views so that those views come into my DB context and I can use them finally. In spatial, so spatial data, we can bring those in and use them in EF Core. Keyless entity types. A view is a keyless entity type, but you can also have tables that don't have a primary key to them, and that can do. You can have kind of ad hoc entities, and we'll look at those, how to do those today. Like if you want to create an entity from your database and you don't have that as a table, you don't have it as a view. Well, there is a way to do that now. And you can't update it and insert on it, but you can query on that ad hoc entity. So we'll take a look at that today, but that stemmed from the keyless entity types. And I think that was EF Core 3.0. And then we have like single query statement per, or single query, SQL statement per query, link query. So that was another feature that I really like. So, but let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. And these are all new features in EF Core 5. So the agenda is, and sorry, the ordering came up, the animation was a little strange. I didn't check that. So, but so we're going to talk about many to many. We're going to talk about split queries. We're going to talk about simple logging. It's really easy to log now for improved diagnostics. Filtered include. That's an awesome feature that I've been waiting for many years to get into EF Core. Flexible entity mapping, identity resolution, required one-on-one dependence. This thing called the DB Context Factory. So if you're a fan of the factory pattern, we will give you some love. And then event counters. So event counters will help you see the performance or the non-performance in your .NET application using EF Core. And then have a way to get into the pipeline for saved changes. So if you've ever wanted to see or do things that as things are being saved from your application back to your data storage, your database, or wherever you store your data, there is now an interceptor for saved changes, and we'll take a look at that. So again, if you have questions, please just ask. Kevin will interrupt me, and we will. I will try to give you an answer. If I don't know, I'll just say I don't know, and I'll go look up the answer and figure out how to get it to you after the meeting or sometime in the future. So let's move on. So many to many. So for a long time, EF, so Entity Framework back in the .NET Framework days, and Entity Framework Core had a really hard time with a many-to-many relationship. And so that has been worked out. So it's interesting. There were lots of different ways that we had to handle that. Most of them was with lots of code, but we have a way to do it now. So imagine you have two entities, and these are the two entities. And there's another entity in this DB context or in this app. It's called blog. So a blog has posts, and posts have tags, but also tags are associated with, because posts have tags, tags can be associated with the posts. So we can have a post that has multiple tags, and then tags have been associated or tagged onto blog posts. So you have this many-to-many relationship. And underneath the covers, so in your database, you probably have a post tag or a tag post table, like some kind of join table underneath that you would have to bring also into your application as another entity, and behave and write lots of code to say, hey, I'm going to create a post, I'm going to attach tags to it. When I save this, I have to save it to the post, and I'm going to have to save it to this post tag join table. And before, so there was a lot more code. So there isn't as much code now. It actually, this allows you to handle that, and I'll show you some code. So this is what it also looks like when we're building it in the onCreating method of the DB context. So you'll see that we have a post, and the post has many tags, and we use we have this thing called use entity, and this use entity will say, because it has many tags, I want you to use the post tag table to keep that many-to-many relationship between a post and a tag. And in the same way, the tag has the same thing. A tag has many posts, and so we have this using entity to table for post tag. So right now, this probably, off the top of my head, for a while, this was not being reverse engineered out of the database. So it wasn't being scaffolded. So if it's not, you may have to go in, take a look at everything, and write and change the DB context to handle some of this. So, but I'm hoping that in .NET 6 it will be scaffolded correctly, and you don't have to do this by hand. But just know that you probably will have to do this type of many-to-many join table. So if I jump out, let me jump out, and because I like to actually show some code, I'm going to jump over.
Woody, there was a question. Are you going to talk anything about mocking or using EF in like terms of testability?
No.
No. Okay.
No, these are just new. Yeah. This is all new features. That's a whole different talk. So nope, we're going to be just talking about new features that I think everyone should look at in Entity Framework Core. Sorry, testing.
All right, we'll find folks a resource for that.
Yeah, find somebody to do testing. So I can. Sean Killian is a good person to probably to bring on about testing. He's shown me quite a bit in the past for that. So, but we're going to come over here. I'm going to open up this blog. Well, I'm going to open up my program. So most of my programs in this are console programs. And so they're not these big, gigantic web applications. They're just console apps that you can run, and all this code is available on GitHub, and I'll put the URL at the end. But if I take a look at this, and let's go up here. Oh, so here's the on model creating. You can see that I do have my blog. So it's creating that blog entity also. So a blog has many posts, but a post doesn't get associated back to a blog. So there's no many to many. It's just I guess just a normal join. But you can see that in here we have a post, and it does use that to table. And in my database, it does have this join table. But you can see that I do not create an entity for that post tag table. It doesn't get represented as an entity in my DB context, because truly a join table should be hidden behind the scenes, and Entity Framework kind of hides that and abstracts that table away as a many-to-many relationship. So as you can see, I have a blog, I have a post, and I have a tag. Those are the only three entities I have in this little application. So that's the first feature. So if you've ever wanted many-to-many, you have it now. Okay, so and I'm trying to get through all these in less than an hour because I respect all your times. Except for Joe's. I don't respect Joe's time. So I would take up the whole day for him if I had to. So okay, split queries. So we know that there are some queries, and you saw on the list of my past items that we talked about that in the past we had this assumption that EF Core would do all of its work on the database server, wherever that was. So in the past, Entity Framework did some of its work on the database and did some of the work back in the application, like filters. So Entity Framework in the beginning, one of the things that people found alarming was that, and this was way back, so it hasn't done this in a while. It would, if you did a filter in your link statement, it would bring back the whole data set and filter that in the application side. So they fixed a lot of that. And in EF Core 2 or 2.1, everything would be done on the other side. So your link statements, nothing in your link statement would be done in the client. Everything would be done over on the database side, on the database server side. And it would be done primarily in one select statement. So EF Core would build this single select statement and send it across the wire and get back the result set, and you would get all of that, which is great. You know what? It really helped. I said it really shared the responsibility between the application and the database server. Well, they found that having everything as one select statement sometimes wasn't the best way to handle it. Like in this example, this was what the select statement would be sending it across a wire to the other side. So here's the what EF core, when you said execute this link statement, it would go across and send this select statement and bring it back. So this is kind of a simple one, but imagine a very complex link statement and trying to do that in one select statement. They got pretty big, pretty hairy, and sometimes they weren't very fast. So there's a new link sub call. And to be honest, I don't even know what they like. There's a new link feature called @SplitQuery. So this is the ability to tell Entity Framework, hey, if you can make this link statement quicker by splitting it up into multiple SQL statements going across the wire, do so. And what will happen with this is these two select statements will be created, sent across the wire, and brought back and put back together, and you get a result set back from Entity Framework Core. And by doing this, you may get better performance. So it's a feature. So if you know that you have a very ugly, hairy link statement, you may just go, hey, Entity Framework Core, go do your thing. If you need to use multiple, split this up into multiple queries, go ahead and do it. So that is a nice feature to have. I don't recommend putting this everywhere, but if I would use this, one, if you know a query is going to be very complex. Two, if your DBA comes back and says that query that you just sent over, it's really complex. It's just taking a long time to perform. That might be a red flag to use as split query. So I'm not going to really show an example of this because we can kind of see it. If I show you the two different ways, you're not going to, for this example, you're not going to see the difference. But just know that there can be a performance issue or a performance increase if you do identify some queries for split query. Okay, simple logging and improved diagnostics. So in the old days, meaning before Entity Framework Core 5, we would have to create a logging factory and create that and associate it with the DB context, and we would have to write code. And you know what? Sometimes writing less code is kind of nice. So this is all that we have to do. On configuring, if you just say as for your DB context options builder, you can add an option that just says log to, and you can say wherever that goes. For in this case, I'm sending it to the console, and it's just going to write a line. So everything that comes across the log gets sent to the console. But you could send it to another DB context to get stored someplace. You can send it to text file. You could send it anywhere that you want to. So it's really simple to do logging now. So I find this really good. If nothing else, adding this to your code, just to and I wouldn't do this for production. I would kind of not send it out to console for production, but if you're testing something, it's easy to add this log to and see what's going on in the console, in the debug console. So it's kind of a nice feature. Again, I mean, I could, well, you know what? Since I didn't show a demo last time, I will show what this looks like. So let me, so I'm going to run this. Like I said, this just shows up in the console. And you can see all these debug. So this just gets all the artists from, and I use a database called Chinook, which is a Microsoft test kind of demo database. And I kind of picked the ball up because they were going to actually get rid of it. And I pulled it, all the stuff, and it's sitting out in one of my repos because it used to live on, Kevin, what was the name of the open source project that Microsoft had years ago that Sarah led, like pre-GitHub, where open source projects would be?
Codeplex.
Codeplex, yes.
Yep.
So Chinook lived on Codeplex, and I had a strange feeling when Codeplex was going to be taken down that Chinook would go down with it, and it actually did. So I grabbed all the stuff and threw it out into a repo. So if you go out to my C Woodruff is my GitHub username. If you go out to my repos, there should be a Chinook database repo that has all the code for it. But this is a fun database. It's kind of a online music store. So it has, instead of bicycle parts and widgets, it has actually albums and rock and jazz and all these different music genres that I love, like Led Zeppelin. Like, what other database has Led Zeppelin as its test database or test data? So it's awesome. So, but you can see up here all these debug statements, and this is what is being logged, all these debug statements. So you can see all these and log them out to someplace. If you're doing some kind of audit, or wanted to store everything about your applications for later use for performance forensics, hey, here's a great log feature. So, okay, so we have simple logging. So I'm going to go back to my project or to my presentation. What's the next thing we're going to look at? Filtered include. So we have the ability to filter when you do a where clause or a where statement in your link statement, but we've never had the ability to filter on the included associated entities. So now we do. So now I can say, you know what, give me all the artists, give me every single artist, but only bring back the albums that are associated to those artists that contain the word "the" in the title of the album. And in this case, I also say like split query, because I know that doing an include sometimes it can be an improvement to allow a split query. So that's why I have as split query. So if I run this, and I'll show you the code for this, and I don't think there's any other code. Yeah, so we'll take a look at the demo. And so filtered include. So in here, I have the same code that I had in my presentation. So I'm going to get all the artists, and I'm going to include albums where the title contains the word "the." And then I'm just going to bring back those albums and then the count of the associated albums that come with it. So let me run this. Okay, so you can see it found all these albums, but for most of them, it's going to have a 0 because they don't have albums that have the word "the" in them. But like this one does, Gustav Mahler. Let's see if we see any London Symphony Orchestra and Sir Charles Macaris. So that has one album that has the, let me see, Temple of the Dog. So Temple of the Dog had, the album name was Temple of the Dog, and it had "the" in it, so it comes back as 1. So the nice thing about these filtered includes is that in the past, you may have had to do some extra coding when they were coming out to search all the associated entity collections, but now you don't. You can actually have the database do all that work for you. So that's a nice feature. Any questions, Kevin? No questions so far?
Nope, pretty quiet.
No, pretty quiet. Oh, I'm boring everyone. Okay.
Yeah. Or they're so engaged.
They're so, well, yes, that's a better way. That's a better way of saying it. They're very engaged. They're learning a lot. So, okay. So flexible entity mapping. So this is kind of a cool new feature, and I kind of alluded to it in the beginning, but let's dig into it. So say kind of two initial things. So say you had an entity that wasn't represented by a table. And let's say that you didn't have control of your database. So it was in control of a team of DBAs. And they're good guys, the DBAs, but they don't want to add a view to it just for you. They're like, no, you know what? We're not going to add views. We're against views. Well, how could you get a entity that's not a table, but still use it in your application? Well, you can do flexible entity mapping. So you can give it, as an example, the first one is I'm giving it a interpolation string, and I'm giving it a select statement, and I'm going to associate that to a entity that I have in my application domain. So in this case, I'm just representing an album, but if you can see, I'm also including the artist name. So in my database, the album table has an ID. It has a title. It has an artist ID to it. But who wants to get an album, some album information, if you don't have the artist name coming back also? It's kind of, you always want to know who created that album. So in this case, I can add that name, artist name, to the to my album entity, and it will bring that in. So it's kind of cool. So you could actually use this for domain-driven development also. So the interesting thing is you can create all these ad hoc entities from your database, bring them in. Now, you're not going to be able to insert against them or update against them or do any delete, but you could write your own code to do any of those behind the scenes. But so it's kind of an interesting way to give you some flexibility that you may not have had in the past, to bring some ad hoc entity types into your application. And also you can bring in functions now, and you can associate a function to an entity type. So I just threw out this example. So get albums from artist. So this function takes an artist ID, and it returns from this function the albums that are in there. But you could do it as like a calculated value. So maybe you do a function in here called state tax or country var, or some kind of calculation that you do in a function, and you can bring that back inside of a entity, and you can work with it in your entity framework code. So, but we can also do something like this. We can say that we have an entity called album, and it's associated to a table of that same name. So there's a table in the database called album. And everything other than that, everything else is the same except for one line in here. So that to view, what that's saying is if you have a to view and you give a view name, so that album with artist name, it will, when it queries against, when you build a link statement targeting album, if you have that to view, it will not build a select statement against the album table. It will actually build a select statement against the view. And everything else will be done against the album table. So inserts, updates, and deletes will all be done against the album table. So this is really cool because it gives you the flexibility to have kind of some extra features that you can bring, maybe some added properties that you want to bring over from your database into an entity, but still be able to do all the other CRUD stuff. So the C and the U and the D. So, but I find this is really cool, and we'll even take a look at a demo of it. Okay, so let's take a look at some code. Let's do that. Let's get rid of that. So let's go down and we will do flexible entity mapping. So again, this one is using Chinook DB context. So again, in here, so in my on model creating, I have album, and I have this to view. If I take a look at the program that I'm running, I'm just going to go get all my albums. I'm going to loop through those albums, and I'm going to push out to the console on each line. I'm going to push out the album name, dash, and then the name. So it brought back a name, which is the artist name. So in this case, Entity Framework has a title, which is the title of the album, and it has a name, which is the name of the artist that's coming from a different table through a view. So let's run this. So you can see that there's all of our albums. So let's go up and see some Okay, so there is Jimi Hendrix. So Are You Experienced? And artist is Jimi Hendrix. So they're surfing with the Alien, the remastered version, and that was a Joe Satriani album. So that was a great album that I loved when I was younger. Greatest Hits by Lenny Kravitz. So this has some interesting data. I love this data. So it has kind of everything for everyone. For the metalheads, it has Iron Maiden, and for lots of Iron Maiden. But for people like me, it has Foo Fighters and little Frank Sinatra and Faith No More. It has a little bit of everything in it. So that's why I love using it. Okay, so we saw that we can create ad hoc entities coming back from select statements. We saw that we can map functions to entities now, and we can kind of enhance our current entities through the use of views. So very cool stuff that the Entity Framework team has been doing. And somehow I lost my, there we go. Okay, so identity resolution. So this is not identity as in a user identity. This is entity as in identity for databases. So think of it as identity meaning the primary key value for a column in a database table, and then how that corresponds to the uniqueness of a entity in EF Core. So I don't know if you knew this, but there was a link statement called as no tracking, and as no tracking could be used when you were building your queries, so that it told Entity Framework that you didn't care about tracking any changes inside those entities. So what I mean by this is Entity Framework allows you to bring back a query and all the data back to it. You can, if you don't have as no tracking, you can modify those entities, those objects, because they are kind of entity objects in your application. You can modify those, and those will be stored in the data in local memory until you say save changes on that entity through the DB context. And at that point, Entity Framework will take all of the changes for all of the entities that it has and push out those changes out to the database and push them out, and they should all go into the database. Not always, but most times they will, unless you have some kind of someone else from some other application changed some data and there was a integrity issue. But if you did as no tracking, just as no tracking by itself, you were telling Entity Framework, don't track changes to any of the entity objects that you're pulling back in this link statement. And the reason why they had that was for people like me who build APIs, and I don't change anything. I basically just get data and turn it into JSON and push that JSON out through an HTTP response. So I don't need all the overhead for tracking all those changes in those entity objects. One caveat with using as no tracking is that it also turns off identity resolution. So if you do want, some people do want to be able to modify those objects, those entity objects, and save them back to the or use them or do something with them. Identity resolution is turned off if you use as no tracking. So they added this new link statement that says add no tracking with identity resolution. So what will happen is if you try to do something, and I'll show an example in a second, if you try to do something and you're trying to store like maybe a new object that is trying to, that already has a identity that exists in the database, it won't let it happen. So let's take a look at this code example. It's a little easier to look at in the code. So again, shut this down, turn this off, and we will identity resolution. So in here, I have Chinook DB context, the Chinook database that I've been using a lot today. And I'm going to grab an album. So we're going to call it album A, and it's just an ID of 1. So if I grab this album, I have it. It's from the database. I'm saying don't track, use the as no tracking with identity resolution. So I'm saying don't track any of the changes. I don't care about changes that you do to it. Don't keep track of those changes if I do anything with album A. But I want to make sure that that no one messes around with that ID. So I also have this album B, which is a new album. It's a new object, and I give it ID 1, and I give it some title, London Calling. It's actually my favorite album of all time, so it's by The Clash. So London Calling, I give that as a title. Down here, I say update album B. I could say insert, or I could say update. I'm just going to say update. If I don't have this statement, it will throw an exception. So this exception will get thrown. So that's the interesting thing. If I had something like, this. So if I just said, give me A, create B, and I try to update B, which by doing an update, if it's a new object, it will actually insert it. That will throw an exception, and that exception will get handled someplace. In this case, inside there is a console write line. Interesting, if you do as no tracking with identity resolution, and you do the same call it doesn't even throw an exception. It just doesn't let it happen. It will actually go through that and go on, and like nothing happened. It won't tell you that it didn't do it, but it won't do it. So just remember, I'm just giving you a little insight into this. It will not throw an exception. It will just skip over it and go, nope, I'm not letting this go out to the database because I have identity resolution turned on. But I don't have entity tracking turned on. Okay. So if you have questions about that, you can ask. But it's an interesting feature that I probably will be, for up to now, I have used as no tracking in my APIs for all my queries. I think I'm going to do as no tracking with identity resolution from now on. So I'll be going through some of my API projects and updating those queries, because I think that is a very good, especially for API people, that's good just to make sure that you're not doing something inside your API that will mess up your data. Okay, so required one-on-one dependence. This is interesting. So this is a way for us to say, hey, an album has one artist and only one artist. So I want Entity Framework to keep that, to adhere to that rule. And you can see down here in the last part of this model builder for album, you can see that entity dot has one. And what this is saying is there's only one artist that can be associated to an album. Now that's pretty obvious because we only have there's an artist ID for one artist ID for each album. So it's kind of you're stating the obvious. So this is actually a Captain Obvious type of piece of code. But if you could have something that says like has one, where maybe your database is set up to allow many, but you want to say there's only one, you can actually put that in your DB context, and Entity Framework will adhere to that rule and allow only one of a associated entity to be kind of brought into its model, so to say. So not going to show a code example for that. So DB Context Factory. So I'm also not going to show a demo for this because, to be honest, I didn't create one because it was a little more advanced. So this is, instead of, I think I can explain it also. So instead of when, in this case, a controller needs a DB context to come out of the dependency injection container, you can actually have a factory be injected in and to be able to be used. So some people, instead of just maybe getting at the constructor level of your controller, like in most of my controllers up till now, I would go out to in the constructor, I would grab that DB context and associate it to a private property in my controller class. But in this case, I could, if I wanted to do DB context factory, if you like the factory pattern, you can now add a DB context factory to your dependency injection container and get that out so that you could do use the factory pattern in your code. So I thought it was interesting. I don't know if I'm going to use this very much, but there could be cases that I use this. So I just kind of want to explain. And you can even do, like we have that DB context pooling, you can do DB context factory pooling and have a pool in dependency injection container of these DB context factories, so that they don't have to be hydrated and created every time you want to get one out of DI. So that's also a feature. So event counters. So event counters are not part of your code. They're actually kind of outside your code, and I'll show you. So there's these .NET tools that you can install, and one is called .NET Trace, and another one's called .NET Counters, and I use both of them in this demo. If you don't know very much about them, they are really interesting. They're really cool to kind of monitor your where the .NET counters are really cool to monitor your application if you just want to see what's going on. So you install both of these with the global indicator. So you install them globally, and let me run an application. So give me a second while I stand up another instance of my IDE. Any questions out there, Kevin?
We've been having a discussion in chat about code first versus database first. So I don't know if you want to chime in on that or if you want to wait till you're all done.
I don't know, man. I don't want to start a fight. So
no fight. We've been having a lovely conversation about it.
To be honest, I hate code first migrations. I hate them because people don't know how to write a DB context well enough to have a well-tuned database.
Yep.
If you know all the nuances, so you can create all your indexes and create everything that goes into a database, hey, more power to you. But here is, and let me see where this, oh, there it is. So I would, to be honest, if someone is a fan of code first, I would give them this argument. If a database developer or a DBA walked up to you and said, I don't need you to write me an application. I've got a tool that all I have to do is run it against my database, and it gives me an application, and that's all I need. Mm-hmm. Kevin, what would you do if a DBA told you that?
So say that one more time. If a DBA what?
So if a DBA, if you said, hey, you know what, I see you have that nice database.
Yep.
You want me to create an application for you that will hit that database for an end user? And they said, no, it's okay. I've got a tool that will create an application. I just run it against my database. It creates an application, and I'm all good.
Yeah, if the DBA says that to me, I'm probably going to be like, all right, well, I'll talk to you next week.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why is it okay for a developer to basically tell
yep.
DBA the same thing?
Absolutely.
Okay, so think about that.
Yep.
I'm not saying that there aren't cases for code first and migrations, but you have to know really what you're doing, because I have not found a database that a person has created using code first and migrations that did not have major issues in the database.
Yeah.
That you may be able to run queries against that database. You may be able to get data and do all your CRUD calls to it, but that database is not going to be tuned to give you maximum performance.
Yeah. Like when we're writing code, we're more likely to split. So basically, if you're translating a table to a class, when I'm building classes, I'm more likely to split a class into multiple classes or subclasses. And when I'm building a database, I'm less likely to do multiple tables for content. I might not, well, what was it, normalize? I might not normalize a database. It's like, well, if I have a user table might only need one address in it. But if I'm writing code, I might have an address, what's the term, subclass on a user. And I'm thinking if I'm writing that in code first, it might default to having a user and an address table and then doing the join between them.
Then, yeah, so having a many to many.
Yeah, it's easier to build less performing code in EF. Now, if we're talking reads, like we're talking writes, it's hard to screw up a write performance-wise.
Sure, right. I'm not saying, but how many reads do you have compared to a write?
Oh, like order of magnitude more.
Yes, yeah. And that's the thing. And there are ways to in your creating your DB context or creating your code first, adding annotations and stuff that will tell any framework core to create indexes in the generated database. Yep. But you know what? Show me a developer, a .NET C# developer that actually knows how to do that. They're few and far between.
I understand the concepts. It's more of I don't have the 20 years experience doing that.
Exactly.
Necessary. Yeah.
And so that is also what I talk about in my talk, that, you know, if you do write these databases and they get generated from your thing, you have to doubly have to understand the tools, the profiling tools that you have for those database servers like SQL Server. So you can go in and take a look at the query store and all of the stuff to see, because they will tell you if you're missing indexes and stuff like that. I mean, SQL Server is very advanced, and it will tell you this query needs an index, and it will even tell you the SQL statement to run to add that index to your database. So if you use code first with migrations, and you know how to dig into your SQL Server to take a look at all the queries that you're generating to see if there's any missing indexes, hey, then I'm okay maybe with that code first. But for 90% of all people that do code first migrations,
yep,
nothing good comes from it. So that's my soapbox. I'll die in that hill arguing that, and I think it was okay. That's enough. I don't want people hating me. So
no one hates you.
If I keep talking like this, they're gonna hate me. Okay, yeah. So I am going to. I just opened up a web API project, and I'm going to. Can you see that on my screen? Yes, you can. So, yep. So this is just a web API. and I have a Swagger, so like I'm just going to go grab some data from this. So it just grabs some data, and it uses that same database Chinook. So I have this. Now, if I run this, if I bring up a console, and I'm sorry, but I need to, and over here, I'm going to say .NET Trace PS. So what .NET Trace PS does is it will, and let me get back my console, it will allow me to see all of the .NET applications that are running on this machine. So I can just say .NET Trace PS. So right now, there's a couple, but I'm only worried about this Chinook API. And I'm really just worried about the PID, the process ID. So because what I also want to run, I'm going to move this down, is I'm going to want to see, really what I want to see is this .NET counters. So I can say .NET counters monitor. I'm sorry if I'm typing all this out. Hopefully I am writing all this correctly so I don't have a mistake. And I say -P. And what is my PID? I think it's the 119516. So hopefully I didn't, and I did type something.
Could you Control+ on that once or twice to make it easier to see?
It's not a monitor. It's
okay.
So yeah, sorry. I am here. Let me properties font. I should be using the there.
Yeah, that's
I should be using the Microsoft terminal. So let me change that. So .NET counters monitor Microsoft Entity Framework Core. Okay. Shoot. Oh, yeah. Oh, fat fingers. Sorry, I have to type this all over again. So how many people like code first, and how many people do not like code first?
I think I can do a poll. Hold on.
We could do a poll.
I can do a poll. Well, if folks watching on Twitch, I can do a poll. Maybe. Oh crap! There's a lot of stuff in here.
So you do a poll, and I'll show this demo.
All right.
Okay. So what happens when you run this this counter? You get this real-time console application that gives you all this information. One is it gives you all the system runtime information, which is really interesting because it will tell you like your CPU usage and all your information about your garbage collector and even all the different generations. I mean, most .NET developers don't even understand that there's multiple generations inside your garbage collector. So, but this is interesting. But by giving it that Microsoft Entity Framework Core, you're adding to some of the counters. So down here, you get all of your like active DB contacts. So you can see how many DB contacts are currently created and hydrated and running in your application. So right now, I only have one. It'll tell you how many executions failed, optimistic concurrency failures, which are those are things that are given back to the database. So how many failures for putting data into your database? I'm 90% that is correct. How many queries? How many queries per second? How many queries total? Query cache hit? Save changes, so you can see how many times you've modified or done any changes to those entity objects and stuff like that. So this is actually really interesting, and it's really valuable for you as a developer to have this at your fingertips. So use those counters that you have for inside .NET. So I will kill this, or I will say, yep, I can just kill it. Okay, so that is event counters, and I showed the demo. So save changes interception for auditing. This is the last one, and this is something where if you wanted to intercept and take a look at what's going through the save changes, you can now catch certain events inside that pipeline and do stuff with it. So you have to build your interceptor, and I'll show you I'll show the code on how to do that. I won't write it, but I do have the example out in this repo. But it uses it. You have to write an interceptor that adheres to the iSaveChanges interceptor interface. And what you get is you get three types of events. They're asynchronous and an asynchronous version. So one is save changes. So when something gets called save changes, it'll give you that event data, and you can do stuff with it. There's an async version of that. When you save, after you've saved the changes, you can grab onto that event and do something in there. Or if a failure happens on the save changes, you can grab that event and do something in there. So in this case, in this code case that I have for this demo, I'm just going to log all this stuff into another database for auditing purposes. So let's take a look at that demo. So let me grab the right code. Oh, missed it. So let me get rid of this. Let me go up into, where is that? Okay, save changes interceptor. So in here, I just have a few things. I'm going to create a new blog. I'm going to save that asynchronously, and then I'm going to create another blog, and then I'm going to remove it. I'm going to do a bunch of things in here, and I'm going to then take a look, and I have this interceptor that will allow me to grab onto all these events that are happening in my application using Entity Framework Core. So let's take a look at the blog context, because this is the first thing that I need to do. So in here, I have my on configuration. So I'm going to set up my DB context, configure it just like I normally do, but I'm going to add an interceptor in here. And this interceptor is _auditing interceptor. And where I get this is from, I grab it from here. So I could get it from dependency injection, but I didn't in this demo. I'm creating a new auditing interceptor, and I am going to add that to this private read-only property. So let's take a look at this auditing context. So I actually have a separate database, a separate DB context that I am saving either some information. So I'm doing a save changes audit. I'm doing an entity audit, and these are just storing different information. So in the entity audit, I'm just giving the ID. I'm going to give the state, the audit message, and then this is a save changes audit property of some type. But mostly I want this save changes audit, which is an ID, gives me the audit ID, start time, end time, succeed, if it succeeded or not, this save change, and then if it did have an error message, I can get an error message. And then it will give me a list of all of for that save changes, it will give me a list of all the entities that occurred in that save changes call. Because like I said, when you do a save changes on an entity type, you may have n number of entities that you've modified. So in here, we have that DB context. So in here, what I have is this interceptor will get a connection string. It'll have a connection string in here, and it will use that audit DB context throughout the code. So like I said, I have one for each of async and synchronous. So I have save changes async, save changes, and I just did this because I wanted to show all the different ways that you can do it. And then I have saved and saved async. And all this really does is it will give me, so let's just say, let's take a look at saving changes. So saving is what happens, the first event that gets fired. And so I get that event data. I can create on that event data context, I can create a new audit. And basically, I'm just going to add that audit to the DB context for audit, and then it will save that out to the audit database. And again, if I do like for this one, if I get failed, I will say succeeded is false, end time is some UTC now date time, and then I get the error message coming back from that event data. So really all this code is doing is allowing you to get into, and this is the code to create the audit itself. So when we did that create audit, this just kind of created all the information. So it will give you kind of the state depending on that context coming in. So it will know if the state was deleted, modified, or added. So you can do different things based on the state of whatever the state save changes coming through that pipeline. But what I wanted to really show was you now have the ability to tie into that pipeline for save changes. Just like you have the ability, other pipelines, such as like the HTTP pipeline, like the ability to get into things before they get routed over to a controller action. You can actually get into that middleware. So think of this interceptor as the entity framework core middleware that you can get and tie into and do stuff based on it. So you can't really modify. You can't really like modify things in here. You're just reacting and allowed to see the data that's coming through. You can't modify it before it goes on in the pipeline. So that is kind of one thing that you can't do with these interceptors.
There is a good question about the interceptors. Is there any sort of performance hit using these?
Well, sure. I mean, yeah, you're always going to get some performance if you have these in here. So you're going to have to take a look to see, one, if having this type of audit is worth the small performance hit. Now, I mean, these are a few lines of code, but you're talking, these are going to run, if you have them set up for each one of those different stages through the save changes pipeline, you're going to get three calls that you normally wouldn't get if you were just doing a save changes without the interceptor. So yes, there is going to be some kind of performance hit, but you just have to weigh that out with the benefit of what you get from allowing that for that audit purposes.
We had a project. We were doing something similar, not exactly what you were doing, but we were looking at the change tracker, and we had a link query to say, are there any entities of a certain type? And so real quick, look at the change tracker, see if there was anything we actually cared about. If there was, we would go do our performance hitting work. But if there wasn't, in most cases there wasn't, we would just go about our business.
Yeah, and I have something like that for a web API project. It's not in save changes. It's actually in the middleware, in the HTTP middleware, where I check to see when a HTTP request is coming in. I check to see in the body if it's a update or a put.
Yeah.
If it's a put verb, I check to see if an ID is part of the payload coming in. If there's no ID, I just shoot it back as an error. So it doesn't even come in. It doesn't even come into my action controller actions, because I do the same thing with delete. If an ID isn't, if there's no ID with the delete verb, why have it continue on? I just shoot it back as like a 400 error.
Fail fast.
Yeah. But so I know I'm probably way over my time. I sometimes ramble and go on, but I just wanted to give some resources. So if you do want to know more about EF Core, the documentation is excellent. Most of the new documentation that Microsoft has for much of .NET and all of the other frameworks and libraries are really good. So you can just go out to the EF Core documentation. Follow EF Core Team. Their Twitter name is EF Magic Unicorns. So I love that name. Then you can go out on GitHub. And one other thing that they have is they have stand-up meetings on YouTube that they do once a month, and those are really good. So if you're you like to watch the teams do their stand-up, like I love, like today they had the ASP.NET team do stand-up, and they were talking about the minimal API, web API stuff, and that was really interesting. But the EF Core team does stand-ups also, and they record them, and you can find them out on YouTube. But if you want the code for all of these demos that I showed you, you can just go out to my GitHub account, which is C Woodruff, and the repo is EF Core 5 demos. You should be able to find that pretty easy. But if you want any of the previous talks, so I do have an EF Core, I think I have EF Core 3 demos. I don't think I have an EF Core 2 demos, but 3 is kind of my 3 talk was kind of a mashup of 2 and 3. So that one has a lot of demos for a lot of that stuff that I talked about in the beginning from past talks. And that's it. That's my talk. So hopefully someone got something out of that they can go back and use tomorrow at work.
Well, folks, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat now. Woody, the results of our poll favored database first.
Yes.
Over code first.
Thank you. You just gave me inspiration for humanity and our developer community. So
I remember, what was it, EF1 when it was only database first, and you just have to update your model. It was really easy. You just right click
EDMX
model. Yeah.
Remember? And did you ever try to go into the actual contents of an EDMX file and try to muck around with that?
Tried is the word.
Try. Yeah. It was so easy to mess up. So
it's like, oh crap, I broke it. And this is before I was real heavy into Git. I think we were using we were using Vault or Perforce, and trying to undo changes. Oh, it was a pain in the butt.
Yeah, with that, you just basically have to regenerate that EDMX all over again. So
good time.
Well, hopefully I didn't tease Joe too much.
Well, Joe hasn't shown his face since you teased him. So maybe.
I'm sorry. I'll have to apologize to him, but we give each other crap all the time. So we actually work together. Joe works at Rocket Mortgage. He's a great guy.
All right. People just saying thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I can see the comments, so I appreciate everyone. I really love this talk. So it's fun to do. It's even more fun when I'm in front of people, but and I hope soon we will get in front of people. And I promised Drew and Kevin that in a couple years, maybe next year, 2023, I'll actually come to Virginia to.
We'd love to have you.
People. Yeah. So.
When we're allowed to meet in person again, I think we were allowed to meet in person, but I don't know if that's changed any. We haven't had that discussion.
Yeah.
We'll wait another year just to see how the.
Well, at least wait.
Sells.
I don't know. Now I'm just back to knowing that everyone was in favor of database first brought me up, but now we're talking about this and.
I'm sorry.
So it's okay. Well, I just have a feeling that we're gonna have another surge. Winter's gonna come. I'm not being political. I'm just saying, get vaccinated.
Wear your mask. Get the shot.
And in a few weeks, the Pfizer vaccine will be approved, and hopefully people will get vaccinated. So that's just coming from a concerned person.
Yeah. So different topic. You had mentioned the ASP.NET stand-up earlier. I watched a good part of that too. You do a lot of API talks. What do you think about minimal APIs in terms of? Because I have an opinion.
I'm mixed.
Yeah.
I'm mixed. I want to see my thing is I decouple everything.
Yeah.
And I want to see how I can decouple things. And you know what? The demos that Microsoft does, the demos that they do, they have to keep them relatively simple.
Yes.
To explain things. And like I say in many of my talks, like web APIs, like your controller actions should do nothing but call something to get information and send it back. That's all it should do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, now I think they're interesting. Now I do see one place that I could see this minimal API working out really well is in Azure Functions.
Yep.
And AWS Lambdas. I think that may be where they will just kick ass.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. It's at least every demo I've seen of minimal APIs reminds me of a intro level demo to Node.js and Express. And I think that's the level of introduction they're trying to hit is, look, I can write an API, quote API, in 10 lines of code with no ceremony. I just write functional code. But as soon as you get past that, you've now hit this point where it's like, oh, crap. Now I need a layer of complexity.
Yeah, the complexity turns on. Yeah. And you know what? If I'm just writing one little endpoint to do the 4 verbs for one thing,
like Azure Functions, you would.
Yeah, Azure Function, and just have a bunch of Azure Functions working in a micro API type of environment.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I forgot the micro. My brain is turning off. It's almost 8 o'clock.
No, you're fine.
What's the architecture idea? The micro services. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You could create a bunch of microservices for, instead of having to stand all of them up and have them sitting there listening, you just create each one with a minimal API sitting either in your Azure function or your AWS Lambda.
And I really like that idea. It feels like a good mix between minimal, like the demo we saw earlier today, and full blown out controllers. So always the thing I hate about just traditional API development in .NET. It's like, all right, I need another controller. Let me set everything up. Okay. Our friend Steve Smith has another interesting approach with API endpoints.
Yeah, I like the endpoint idea. So it's Steve is onto something.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I mean, I do want to take a look. I want to try out the minimal API with those two cloud features. Because one, they're cheap too. I mean, Azure Functions and AWS Lambdas they're really cheap to use. So,
well, speaking of Azure Functions, our talk next month is actually Azure Functions and Azure API Management. with Mr. Brian Gorman.
Cool.
Going to join us. So if you haven't already, go to hrnug.org and join our meetup so you get notifications for that stuff. Surly Dev, what's Ardalis's approach? So he has this concept called API endpoints, which traditionally Web API is controller based. So like
it's like MVC.
Yeah, it's MVC, but you're not returning HTML. You're returning JSON or XML, or whatever the client negotiates. And you with endpoints, you're getting to the meat of it. Given an endpoint, a verb and an endpoint, do something, and add in your layer of validation, all the stuff you need. But you don't need the ceremony of a controller every time you want to do that. So Steve's on to a good workflow, and I've been meaning to do some demo work with it because I might have a couple of cases I want to pull it in. So it's another thought process for you guys.
Steve's a smart guy. I like talking to Steve. So he always makes me feel dumb though, which is good. I like being the dumbest. And here's my advice to everyone on this meeting: always be the dumbest person in the room.
Yep.
That's my advice to you. Always be the dumbest person in the room. So, and usually I am. So I like being around really, really smart people.
All right, and then Surly Dev. Yep, Steve usually streams on Fridays. Surly Dev's dropping all the links, so I don't have to do any of the work.
Yeah, thank you, Surly Dev. So,
but thank you everyone for hanging out with us today. Thank you, Woody, for hanging out with us.
I loved it.
I love a good EF talk, and this was a really good EF talk. Like I've seen EF talks. This is probably like my top 3 EF talks.
Wow, thank you. I'm honored.
So high praise.
Calling from a guy who said he mostly uses Dapper.
So, So I love me some.
But I use Dapper. I mean, in that API project, I have interchangeable Dapper, EF Core. I even do something where I do data sets that return JSON directly from the database, which isn't that performant, but it's kind of cool to do. So
I have clients that will use any framework or DB context just to manage the database lifecycle, and then do Dapper directly off the database connection.
Yeah, there's lots of good hybrid. Yeah, there's lots of good hybrid. Like if you need a really fast query, throw in Dapper. For everything else, you can use EF Core to get all the cool features that I showed you.
I've combined Dapper with a tool called SQL Kata to get some of the query building that you get with it.
That's cool. Nice. Yeah.
That's cool too. So.
All right. Yep. Well,
that is my Twitter handle. Thanks, Surly Dev. Okay. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to cut the stream, but we'll see you all again next time.